On July 13th this year, at 12:29 hours, the Indian electricity grid saw 42.79% of the energy flowing through its veins come from wind and solar sources, that is variable renewable energy. This is a record, the highest ever. This is also a very high number because not too long ago, the contribution of renewable energy was in single-digit percentage-wise. To help us understand what these challenges are, we have with us Mr. M Ramesh, who tracks these issues. Welcome to the show, Ramesh.
Thank you, Bharat. Hopefully we'll discuss not only the challenges but also the possible solutions.
Ramesh, for the sake of our viewers, can you elaborate on the source of this information?
Oh yes. So this information is available from the website of Grid India. If you go to Grid India website, click on reports and then click on daily reports. Several of them under daily reports. You go to daily variable renewable energy, daily VRE it says. From there, you find that it's not just on July, because July 13th was the highest, 42.79%. But the proportion of variable renewable energy, which means wind and solar, the contribution of wind and solar to the total electricity in the grid has consistently been about 35% for quite some time now, which is a pretty high number.
With the contribution of renewable energy to total energy output being set to rise, the challenges, you say, are also set to rise.
Yeah.
What exactly is the problem?
You see, suppose there is a 2 gigawatt solar plant and a cloud passes under the sun above the solar plant. Then the energy dips, the output of the solar plant dips. Likewise, if wind blow slows down, the output of the wind plant will come down. And likewise, if it increases, it will increase. Now, your question is, why is this a problem, right?
High contribution of high variable renewable energy, as you put it. Why is that a problem?
If the injection of electricity into the grid keeps rising and falling, it will cause problems to the grid essentially in terms of frequency, voltage, and power flow stability. The grid could trip. Even otherwise, if you have this much variation in the grid and it reaches the other end, the consumer end, the consumer will have a problem. His machines will go for a toss. So it does impact grid stability in a very significant manner. We have to find ways of handling the grid in a situation where there is more and more of intermittent, fickle renewable energy coming in and going.
So with greater contribution of renewable energy or variable renewable energy, there'll be a surge in frequency as well?
Yeah, there could be a dip in frequency, there could be an increase in frequency. In India, we're supposed to maintain a frequency of 50 hertz, right? Now, suddenly you put more power into the grid, then the frequency will increase. Likewise, if the electricity supply falls, the frequency will come down. When I say come down, I mean 48, 49.8, 49.7. Even that is a big problem. So we cannot have a situation like this. Likewise, voltage also will vary if you keep injecting more or less all the time. So that's a big problem.
So you talked about the problems. What are the solutions?
Well, yes. I always maintain that problems and solutions are twins. If there is a problem, there is also a solution. Now, I would like to divide the solutions, the universe of solutions, into two broad categories. One is grid capacity, the other is grid control. Now, in grid capacity, what I mean is essentially building more and more transmission lines, and also upgrading the existing transmission lines so that it's enabled to carry more power. And also other things like moving supply closer to the demand, so that it doesn't have to travel over very large distances. That is about capacity. Lots of things are happening. There is incidentally a National Committee on Transmission. Again, if you go to Central Electricity Authority's website, you will find the minutes of these meetings of the National Transmission Committee. They are building more and more transmission lines. For example, Khavda in Gujarat, where some 30 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity is coming up. So lots of efforts being put into evacuate the electricity. Whether this is happening at the required pace is another matter. It's not happening at the pace that is required. But it is fair to say that things are moving in the right direction. Hopefully it will gain speed. So that is the grid capacity part of it. Now, grid control is, is equally, if not more important in maintaining grid stability.
Minor point here, Ramesh. You talked
Yeah.
about the desire to have generating plants closer to the destination.
Yeah.
I understand, because you'll save on investments in infrastructure. But both these sources, wind and solar, as contributors to renewable energy, need large swaths of land, both of them. So getting it as close to the destination as possible is probably wishful thinking.
Well, in the case of wind, perhaps yes, but solar can be also distributed. You see, there are large solar parks, Charanka, for example, Bandla, and so on and so on, Rewa in Madhya Pradesh. There are large solar plants. One way of doing it is that. The other way of doing it is can be small plants spread all across the place. Wherever you have space, you can put it up. Rooftops included. It is possible. As for wind, yes, wind is a little more tricky because you cannot put up wind plants everywhere. You have to do actually micro-siting. Even if your studies show that in this particular region, wind flow is this much, wind speeds are this much, you still have to micro-site it and put it exactly at that point. Otherwise, your generation will suffer and your investments will also be not paid adequately. To answer your question, yes, you have to do it wherever it is possible.
Fine.
Yeah.
Please go ahead. You're talking about the solution.
Oh yes, well, when it comes to grid control again, in my mind I would like to divide the solutions into broadly three categories. One is technological interventions. The other is grid operations themselves. Now, by that I essentially mean forecasting and stuff like that. The third is use of market instruments. Now, these are basically three things that are being attempted. So when it comes to technology, again, there are quite a few things possible. One of them, let us take it in the ascending order of complexity. Okay. One thing that you can do is to bring in storage. Again, as we know, today storage or battery energy storage system, BESS it is called, is the most happening thing in renewable energy sector today. So many companies have announced investments in BESS. Because today we are not making the entire integrated BESS systems. We are buying batteries, assembling them into this BESS systems. There are also proposals to go down in the value chain, also start manufacturing batteries. That's another story. And there is other thing called pumped hydro. Essentially, there are these two means of storing large amounts of electricity. One is BESS, the other is pumped hydro. Again, to give an indication of what we are looking at in the coming years, I'd like to take you to this, the document called National Resource Adequacy Plan for the years 2026-27 to 2035-36, a 10-year period of the Central Electricity Authority, which mentions how much of BESS and how much of pumped hydro storage India needs to be able to handle grid going forward the next 10 years. If I remember the numbers right, they say the pumped hydro storage needs to go from around 5 gigawatts now to 91 gigawatts in 10 years. BESS again, CEA says should go up from about 5-6 gigawatts now today, and pretty soon it might go to 12 gigawatts because a lot of installations are happening. It should go to something like 80 gigawatts. Now, imagine all these multiplying about 7 times, 8 times in the next 10 years. That is an enormity of the requirement. Things are again happening at adequate pace or not, it's another question, but it is gratifying to know that things are moving in at least in the right direction. The next thing is what they call flexible coal. If I were a coal plant, I would be very sorry. There was a time when I was a king. People looked to me for delivering energy. Today, I'm asked to stand by. Well, jokes apart, coal plants can be made flexible. That is, they can quickly generate and inject more electricity, or they can be asked to pipe down a little bit. These are called ramp up and ramp down. And the rate at which they do, which is usually measured in terms of minutes, is called ramp up rates and ramp down rates. Today, broadly, Indian coal plants are able to ramp down from their 100% capacity to about 55% capacity today. But the technologists are broadly of the view that our coal plants should be made even more flexible so that they are able to ramp down to a limit of about 30% at least. Then you will be able to handle more and more of variable renewable energy, because if renewable energy falls, you can quickly ask a thermal power plant to generate more and make up for the shortfall of renewable energy.
I'm curious here, I want to interject. So, to a person who's not clued into the industry, is it not switch on and switch off? If I put in coal power generator, if I don't, it doesn't?
No, you can't switch on and switch off a thermal power plant, because switching on itself, by the way, you would be interested to know, takes about 2 days.
So,
You start with oil, you start the boiler, it starts burning, and then slowly you start injection of coal. For it to come, to start generating electricity, it takes about 2 days. Right? If you switch off, then you can't switch on again. It's not switching off or switching on, but to ramp up electricity generation, ramp down electricity generation. You can ask it, the plant, by the way, is running. It is operating all right, but it can produce more electricity or it can produce less electricity as demanded.
So the target of 30% you mentioned is 30% of my capacity is what I should ramp it down.
Yes.
Got it.
Now, how it is done is again another technology question. It is essentially done by combustion. Controlling combustion and stuff like that. Controlling combustion again is a very complex process. It is not simply a question of putting in more coal or less coal. It's essentially that, but to be able to do that, you have to do a whole lot of other things within the boiler. There is software intervention and so on and so forth. That's a different conversation altogether. But technically, coal plants can be made to ramp up, ramp down, and they can be used as instruments to maintain grid stability. The third and perhaps the most important, perhaps most interesting technological intervention is inverters. Now, what is an inverter basically? I mean, I know everybody knows what an inverter is. Inverter is essentially a device that converts direct current into alternating current. A solar power plant produces direct current, DC. You need something to convert it to AC and then inject into the grid. That's essentially what an inverter is. But traditionally, these inverters have been rather dumb machines. All they did was to convert. What they do is to follow the grid. For example, the inverter senses the grid characteristics, frequency, voltage, and so on, several thousands of times a second, and then adjusts the injection of electricity accordingly. Now, I think I made it a little dense here. For example, if the frequency in a line has fallen from 50 to 49.8, now the electricity that is injected from a solar power plant via the inverter should also be 49.8. Otherwise, it will again create problems. It is like, a small canal putting in water into a river.
Got it.
Okay, the pressure should match. If the pressure falls, the water from the river will get into the canal. If the canal pumps in water, pushes more water into the river, the flow of the river itself will be higher.
Wonderfully.
And something like that. So this will sense the grid characteristics and adjust the input electricity accordingly. In a sense, this is following the grid. These are grid following inverters. Now we are asking the inverters to do a lot more than just inject electricity into the grid. We're asking, there are what are called grid forming inverters as opposed to grid following. So you had grid following inverters. Now people are talking of grid forming inverters. Now what is a grid forming inverters? It not only senses the grid characteristics and injects electricity, it also corrects the grid itself. That is, if the electricity, again to take frequency as an example, if the frequency in a grid has fallen to, let's say, 49.8, so this inverter will push in more electricity. I know I'm oversimplifying here. It will push in more electricity and restore the grid to 50 hertz.
Wow, okay.
So we are now looking at technological interventions in these terms. Earlier we had things like, LVRT, HVRT, this is low voltage right through, high voltage right through. That is, if voltage falls below a certain point, then the grid will disconnect simply. The plant will disconnect from the grid. I don't know, for it to be restored, it could take time. Now, LVRTs, again, these are all, by the way, the difference between a grid following and a grid forming inverter is nothing very big other than software intervention. It's all essentially software. There could be some hardware here and there, but majorly software. You had things like LVRT, HVRT, high voltage right through and so on. These are software that ensure that the grid is not, the plant is not disconnected from the grid. Even if the voltage falls, for example, if there is a lightning strike and the voltage, there is a surge in voltage, the plant shouldn't disconnect from the grid. So this HVRT makes that possible. So earlier you had, these are, by the way, are mandatory in wind farms. Yes. Taking this further, we now are looking at grid forming inverters. Basically, all of these things come under the head smart inverters. So the inverters themselves function as though they were micro power plants to maintain grid stability.
So it's interesting, Ramesh. Now you talked about inverters being a dumb machine. They were actually accessorial, and now they're actually controlling or forming the grid.
Yes, that's the point.
It's very interesting. So what is the status of grid forming inverters in India?
Well, it is beginning to happen now. Of course, there is a lot of talk about it. It is taking that center stage in terms of discussion, in terms of narrative. So this is going to happen. I know that in May this year, a company called Kehua Digital said that it had installed the country's largest standalone BESS system. Now, I have not verified if it is indeed the country's largest or not, but they did say it was a BESS system with grid forming inverters. So, over a period of time, I'm pretty sure that the regulations will mandate the use of smart inverters. Essentially, since we already have LVRT, HVRT and so on, essentially the regulators will mandate grid forming inverters along with any new project that comes up. The thing to note here is, I was talking about storage. The latest regulations have made storage a part of transmission system itself. Earlier they were not. Now this is very significant because many things can happen if storage itself is taken as a part of the transmission system and not as some standalone thing. For example, it makes storage part of grid planning itself rather than an afterthought. It therefore potentially gives storage a regulated revenue model. A merchant battery normally has to make money through arbitrage, ancillary services and capacity payments and so on. A transmission asset, by contrast, has a regulated cost recovery framework. In as much as storage is a part of transmission itself, the entire revenue model becomes different. Here is an instance when regulations have kind of helped storage deployments.
Ramesh, that was exhaustive and pretty intense.
Hopefully interesting too.
Certainly was interesting and insightful. So we've discussed the technological solutions to the challenges to grid stability. We still have two more topics left, like Mr. Ramesh elucidated in the beginning. One is grid operations, the other is market instruments, the use of market instruments. So look out for the next video. We will elaborate on these two. Thank you, Ramesh. Lovely having you with us.
Thank you, Bharat. Enjoyed this talk.